in the first year, you know. A lot of people worry about it, and they say, "Oh, won't that cause a crash in the economy, and this will really wreck things?" You can't do that. But what about saving all this money on the wars? Wouldn't that be a good place to start? In the last 10 years, there was $4 trillion added to our debt by fighting these wars overseas. Now, the founders had a good way of restraining us from getting involved in war. They simply wrote into the Constitution that only Congress can declare the war, and which means the Congress is the closest to the people, so the people have a say through their congressmen whether or not we will make this precise declaration of going to war. Since World War II, we haven't done it. Since World War II, we haven't won a war. Since World War II, we've spent trillions of dollars and loss of hundreds of thousands of lives and hundreds of thousands of people injured. And just think of the tragedy of the injured that's coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan now. If you look at what kind of lives that we have lost in the last 10 years since 9/11, Americans, soldiers and contractors, we've lost 8,500. That's not a fair deal. I understand 9/11 very, very well, but going into a policy where we spend a lot of money, bankrupt ourselves, and a lot of Americans get killed, that's not very good payback. We need to wise up and have a different type of foreign policy. So declaring war on the world by a global war on terrorism is a monstrous thing to deal with, but by marching around the world believing that we have the moral authority to bomb any country, any place, because there might be a terrorist hiding behind a bush, and having secret weapons, and having drone missiles directed from individuals in the United States and going over, and guess what? We make mistakes. I mean, do we know that we kill the right people? No. We know that a lot of children and a lot of innocent people die, and we know that every time you kill one over there under those circumstances, you probably create another 100 who's saying, why are we being terrorized by bombs falling out of the sky? We haven't done anything to the Americans. So there's every reason in the world why we can cut a lot of money out of the military. We can have priorities. If we continue to do what we're doing, we're going to bring in the destruction of the currency, and even the Social Security recipients and the elderly getting medical care and the children's health care and the education program, they will come crashing down, because when the money doesn't work, nothing works. So we could work our way out of it, but we can't do it by spending more money and printing more money. It won't work, and I think the American people know it, that it can't work. So my idea of cutting $1 trillion sends a message that we're going to get our house in order. We can start with overseas spending. We don't need to give away foreign aid. I'm convinced that foreign aid is taking money from poor people in this country and giving it to rich people in poor countries. And it ends up to be a political football, and it doesn't help the people it's supposed to help over there. It helps the government. And besides, if we're a very wealthy country and doing well and setting an example, we as individuals can decide where to send our money and help the people truly in need. And even in the midst of this recession, the American people have been very generous. There's still crises around the world, and the American people come. It's so much better than depending on government bureaucrats and special interests doing these kind of things. So we can make these cuts. If we do this, the other suggestion I have is going back to the 2006 budget. And the government wasn't too small in 2006. It was still rather big, so it's not like we're destroying the whole government. We're just going back to a more modest time and getting rid of a few departments, like, say, 5 of them to begin with. I don't think we need the Department of Energy passing out ethanol benefits to anybody. So there's a lot of things that we could do to spend a lot less money. And if we did that, we don't have to start. And I think politically, it's a mistake to start on child health care or food for poor people or the elderly health care. Now, those programs theoretically shouldn't have started, and they're not working. If we continue to do this, they're all going to come crashing down. But if we want to work our way out of it, we have to say, we're all going to cut, and we should get the people, right, left, center, independents, to agree that coming home and stop spending this money overseas during these wars would be the easiest place. Cut these others and try to preserve these programs and let people get weaned off. For instance, I think it would be just great if we did this and offered everybody that's coming out of college right now and having a tough time, if you wanted to assume responsibility for yourself, to stay out of the Social Security system and keep your own money. The founders were rather clear about the foreign policy. Their strong suggestion was that we have friendship and trade with as many countries as possible, any that are willing. Now, so often I will be charged, and you will as well, and say, oh, you're a bunch of isolationists. You don't want to deal with the world. Oh, yeah, we want to trade with the world. We want to travel. We want to go back and forth. We want to engage. And the individuals who have the sharpest criticism and call us isolationists are the ones who are the very first ones to put on sanctions on countries trying to start another war. Yeah. Woo! The very first ones who want to close the war. And they're the very same people who won't even entertain the thought that it's time to start talking to the Cubans and travel to Cuba and invest in more sanctions on Cuba. I think when big, rich countries like ours that have all the military might more than all the other countries get together, and we intimidate small little countries, third world countries, with sanctions and threats, I think it's a sign of insecurity. We shouldn't be insecure. We have so much strength. But we will become insecure if we continue to do this, because our economy will not sustain us. Big governments and empires and countries that overextend overseas are usually never defeated militarily. And we're not going to be defeated militarily. We have the military might. But just think, in our lifetime, I mean, the Soviets didn't have to be defeated. When I was in the Air Force in the 60s, believe me, it was a pretty hot Cold War at the time. And we had the missile crisis in Cuba and these other things. But the way the Soviets were defeated, they defeated themselves, and when they were defeated for economic reason, they collapsed upon themselves. And that is what's happening to this country. The biggest threat is here at home. It's not foreign. It's domestic. But ultimately, the real test is looking at our individual lives and how the government is controlling us as individuals, and what is our personal liberties all about. And this is where I think we're slipping so rapidly away from what was intended. And so many people have been willing to say, well, I know I have to give up some of my freedoms to be safe. And I'd like to suggest you never have to and never should give up any of your liberties for safety and security. But this certainly came up after 9/11 and the rapid passage of the Patriot Act. The congressman I was sitting next to when we were voting on the Patriot Act, he was voting for it, and we only had it on the floor about an hour or so. The bill had been around for a long time, in one form or another, years, but they couldn't get the consensus to pass it. So after 9/11, the consensus was there. Oh, we have to do something. We have to do something. I said, why are you voting for this? You don't even know what's in it. He says, I know. I said, you know, there's going to be some bad stuff in this. He says, yeah, I know that. I said, why are you going to vote for it? He says, how am I going to go home and explain to my constituents that I voted against the Patriot Act right after 9/11? I said, that is what your job is. Go vote right and go home and explain it to them what you're supposed to be doing. But instead, we have continued the process. Not only has it been the Patriots